This episode is brought to you by Hired.com. Searching for a new job can feel stressful, scary, and time-consuming. Pushy recruiters try to sell you on roles that you don't actually want, and job boards make you feel like you're throwing your resume into a black hole, never to be seen again. Sometimes you go all the way through an interview process just to find out at the very end that the salary offer or company culture doesn't match what you're looking for. Hired is the world's most intelligent talent matching platform for full-time and contract opportunities in engineering, development, design, product management, data science, sales, and marketing. We make your job search faster, focused, and stress-free. Instead of endlessly applying to companies and hoping for the best, Hired puts you in control of when and how you connect with compelling new opportunities. After completing one simple application, top employers apply to hire you. On Hired, you receive personalized interview requests and upfront salary information so you can make informed decisions about which opportunities to pursue over a condensed timeline. Throughout the process, your dedicated talent advocate will have your back, providing unbiased career coaching to help you put your best foot forward with potential employers. Hired offers access to 4,000 plus innovative employers, including big brands such as Facebook and smaller emerging startups. The size and type of company you want to connect with is totally up to you. We help people find new opportunities in 17 major cities in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. Open to relocation? Let us know. Your privacy and autonomy in your job search is of utmost importance to us. That's why Hired hides your profile from your current and past employers. The best part is it's always free for you to find your next job on Hired, no exceptions. We pay you to get hired. Today's listeners can earn double our normal $1,000 hiring bonus by signing up with the show's link. That's right, earn $2,000 for finding your next chapter on Hired. Visit hired.com/reactnativeradio to learn more. This episode is brought to you by dailydrip.com. Daily Drip makes keeping up to date on programming skills easier. You already know how much time it takes to find good resources and learn new languages. What if the hard part of that was already done for you? Sign up for Daily Drip and pick a topic that you want to learn about. Want to learn React Native? How about Elm? Maybe you want to brush up on your CSS and HTML. Every weekday, you'll get a short video or reading delivered to you via email. The best part is it only takes 5 minutes a day. We have a special coupon code just for React Native Radio listeners. If you sign up using the coupon code RNRadio, all one word, you'll save $9 on your first month, which means you can try out the React Native topic for free. Don't forget to use the coupon code RNRadio to show support for our podcast. Make learning part of your daily routine with dailydrip.com. Hello and welcome to episode 50 of React Native Radio. Today on our panel we have Peter Pikarczyk.
Hey everybody.
I'm your host, Nader Davitt. Today as our special guest, we're going to be talking with the Microsoft team. Today we're going to have both Keith Ballinger and Ram on the show today. So Ram, we've had you on. Can you go ahead and give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Sure, Nader. Hey guys, my name is Parashuram. I go by the name Ram, which is much easier than the longer first and an even longer last name that I have. I work as a senior program manager at Microsoft, and I'm a big fanboy of React and React Native. I've already been on the show speaking about some of the things that we've been doing about React and React Native, and I think one of the reasons I'm excited to be here today is to talk to you guys about the latest things that we are doing with the two technologies.
Okay, great. Welcome. And Keith, this is the first time on the show. So do you mind giving us a quick introduction about how you kind of got into programming in general and also how you began working at Microsoft?
Of course. So my name is Keith Ballinger. Currently, I am the director of PM for our various mobile cloud services, specifically a product called Visual Studio Mobile Center at Microsoft. I got to Microsoft via the acquisition of Xamarin, where I was the VP of product. I was actually consulting with Xamarin from when they started, then I joined them as the head of product about 2 years ago now, and focused a lot of my time on the cloud services that Xamarin had built, Test Cloud and Insights, which was analytics and crash reporting. I got into programming pretty young in life. My dad bought me a VIC-20 in the 80s. It was used and came with a couple manuals on how to program it in BASIC, and I got various magazines that had games in the back, so you'd type in the game to play, very simple video games, but that kind of taught me a lot about programming. And then, after school, I went to Intel and then actually joined Microsoft quite a while ago to work on first in games. And then I went and was part of the team that built C# and the .NET framework, the very first versions of that. And then I left Microsoft and I did a bunch of startups, culminating in Xamarin, and now I'm back.
Very cool. So you were part of the team that actually built the .NET framework in C#?
Yeah, I was the PM for system.web.services, which was the kind of the SOAP stack that existed in the .NET framework, along with various pieces of the networking stack like sockets, TCP, UDP, that kind of stuff, a little bit of the HTTP implementation. So I spent a lot of time on that. And then after we shipped the first couple versions of the .NET framework, I worked on Windows Media Player, and then I kind of ended my time at Microsoft that time around working on identity, authentication, authorization technologies like card space, Active Directory, Federation services, kind of all the precursors to OAuth that exist today.
So before we get into React Native specific stuff, what's going on right now with Xamarin? We had a show a couple of months ago. We covered it pretty well, but I'd be curious to know, what's happened, I guess, lately.
Yeah, it's a good question. So Xamarin, probably the biggest announcement that we've made was in November. So I don't know if that was pre or post when you had, I think, James Motz on, but we shipped in November the first preview of Visual Studio for Mac, which was Xamarin Studio, but now we're enhancing Xamarin Studio, with the rename, but also adding a bunch of features to make it a true IDE experience on the Mac for people. But obviously the major feature set that is still there is being able to build mobile applications, both iOS and Android applications with C# using the Xamarin platform. So that's been probably one of the biggest efforts by the Xamarin platform team. And then I would say also there's been a lot of work on things like workbooks, which if you're familiar with, say, IPython or Jupyter, in the Python world, there's these really great, almost literate programming style workbooks where you can type some text and then you can type some code and you can have that code run inline. And so we've adopted that same kind of programming metaphor, and we call them Xamarin workbooks, where you can actually kind of build up a mobile application in a very literate style using that kind of same kind of mixture of code and text. So that's something else that started last year. I think we first showed off a preview of workbooks at the Evolve conference in April or so, but it's really matured quite a bit. And it's just a fantastic way. If you're a C# programmer and you want to, learn Xamarin's technology, this is just a fantastic way to learn it. And it's frankly, I think I've always been a huge, huge fan of literate programming all the way back to the first time I read about Donald Knuth. So my hope is that becomes a more common paradigm for how people write code, to tell you the truth.
So how can people try that out? Do they just need to download Visual Studio for their Mac and it's kind of built in, or is there a way to...
Yeah, you could. I would say you have a couple choices. You could, if you just go to Xamarin.com and download the latest version of Xamarin Studio, that's probably the best way to go. You could also download the preview of Visual Studio for Mac. But since it's preview, depending on like what you want to do, whether you kind of want to explore what VS for Mac will look like versus kind of do more production-ready stuff, then you might want to keep using Xamarin Studio. And then as part of that installation package includes workbooks.
So does it actually run the device in the window there, or how does that work?
Yeah, it will interact with a simulator or a real device, but it also can do inline just rendering of UI elements into the workbook itself. So it's actually a very fun way to program. And if you're at all familiar with IPython and Python notebooks, you'll find it to be a very similar programming style.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. I know I've been actually playing around with the notebooks, Python notebook, just recently getting into some machine learning stuff. So that does sound pretty cool.
It's that I think is probably the primary way people learn machine learning, right? They learn it with Python and they learn it from a notebook where they, do a couple lines and there's some text, and it's like you're almost getting somebody else's notebook, and that's how you're learning from it. It's like a programming book, but you're writing code as you kind of learn the concepts. And that same kind of educational technique can work for mobile just as easily.
That's super cool. Are there any limitations that come with that? Would you use it for UI? I mean, probably UI stuff as well, outside of just, your data logic that belongs in your app, right?
Yeah, you can use it for everything. I think the one difference between something like a Python notebook somebody uses for data science or machine learning versus how Xamarin workbooks would be used is Xamarin workbooks are a little bit more educational and a little bit more about exploration and kind of discovering how you want to use certain features or solve certain problems. And they're not necessarily something that your final source code for an app that you're going to submit to the App Store is contained as part of. But I think that's a direction in the future that I would love to see Miguel's team take it, but we'll kind of see. Versus, when someone's a data scientist and they're using IPython, that notebook might be their final kind of deliverable because they're just trying to answer a question, right, based on some data set versus shipping an entire app that's going to run forever.
Yeah, so sort of like a way to kind of get into it or play around with some code or to learn it at first or something like that.
Exactly. And Xcode has something similar, right? I think it's been a while since I've used it. I think it was called Playgrounds.
Yeah, I think Swift Playgrounds.
Yeah, Swift Playgrounds. It's kind of a similar idea. It's not the exact same, but you could use a playground to kind of experiment, right, with using Swift, learning various iOS APIs, but you wouldn't necessarily ship the playground as your final app. And you could think of Xamarin Workbooks as a very similar conceptually.
So Swift Playgrounds is like a video game that you almost play. Is that the same idea?
No, it's a little less game-like. It's more like the IPython notebooks.
Oh, okay, cool.
How has the adoption been as far as Xamarin since you guys completely made it open source and Microsoft picked it up?
I mean, it's been very good, right? We don't kind of publicly tell people the exact numbers, but I can tell you, taking a product that cost anywhere from, a few $100s a year to several $1,000s a year, and then making that free as part of Visual Studio, which all .NET developers already had, all C# developers already had, has, obviously really juiced the adoption, right? Because I can tell you one of the things I heard oftentimes, we saw it on our forums as well, is people would want to get into mobile development with C# using Xamarin, but the price was just too big of a barrier for them because they were a student or they were perhaps in a country where they just didn't make very much money. And as a startup, you try to find ways to help people out with those things. You try to create, great student packages or great bundles that can help them out. You try to create, open source as much of your technology as you can, but at the same time, you have to make enough money to actually pay everybody's salaries and keep the lights on and all those kinds of things, because ultimately you are running a business. And so now at Microsoft, we are much more kind of strategic in terms of our value, right? Microsoft's not necessarily looking at the Xamarin platform as the way to monetize people as much as to provide great developer tooling for somebody and then capture that developer's kind of love and heart, right? And that's kind of, I think, at the core of Microsoft's philosophy these days is, I want everybody who is a developer using Microsoft technologies to build their applications, to build their services. And not just because it's good for Microsoft, it obviously is, right? The more of our technology you use, the more, various platforms, whether it's Azure or Windows or whatever, will become more valuable and we can monetize those things. But, just by capturing millions of developers and getting them to love you versus, put up with you, you just create this incredibly virtuous cycle where you're kind of spinning out new and awesome technology all the time. People are adopting that. They're telling all their friends about it. And that just creates a huge ecosystem that's incredibly valuable to you as a company, right? And as a person, as an engineer, it's just, very rewarding. It makes you want to get up in the morning and go to work because you want to see the look on everybody's faces the next time you ship something amazing.
It sounds like there wasn't much animosity with going open source, right? Or maybe animosity is the wrong word, but were the engineers pretty happy with the decision?
I mean, absolutely, right? I mean, you got to remember the history of Xamarin, the company, is Miguel and Nat had a company called Ximian where they worked on GNOME, right? And that once we released C# in whatever it was, 2000, the year 2000, 2001, Miguel really was attracted to C# because he thought that would make a better basis for GNOME moving forward. And since C# wasn't open source, he created Mono, which was the open source implementation of C# in the .NET framework. And after Novell purchased Ximian, Nat and Miguel had a very large team at Novell where they kept basically, and most of that team was working on Mono, which was an all open source, for Linux, for OpenBSD implementation of .NET. And so that's what they focused on for many, many years. And it was around 2008 or so, I think, maybe 2007, that they had the idea, hey, let's take Mono and let's make it work on iOS and Android after that. But that whole history was always about open source. And, even like Nat and Miguel met in the 90s because they were doing open source projects together in IRC. So and even after Xamarin, became a going concern and had code that wasn't open source because we were monetizing it, it was still, we had a significant number of engineers who are working on open source stuff, whether it was Mono or Mono Develop. And so I think it was always in our DNA, and we were always looking for ways to open source more of the software, to tell you the truth.
That's awesome. For someone, from the outside looking in, Microsoft, to me, growing up at least, was always like a closed source company. It's like so cool to see, the open source presence coming from Microsoft and like spearheading, this like Xamarin thing.
It is incredible to see, because when I was at Microsoft, it was definitely not, open sourcing something was considered exceptional, and there had to be a really, really great reason. And oftentimes the license used was not exactly friendly, or what most people would consider an open source license. And I remember when even shipping open source software was difficult. So like ASP.NET, as it matured, they decided, Scott Guthrie, who's now my boss's boss, he's in charge of Azure, he's in charge of all of our developer division tooling. Scott was in charge of ASP.NET, and he wanted to ship jQuery with ASP.NET because they had all this great tooling for ASP.NET that required jQuery. And it was a huge struggle for him to be able to ship jQuery, which was an open source library, because it was just not something Microsoft was used to. But in the last 15 years or so, because of guys like him, because of people like Satya, who realize, open source doesn't have to be something that you have to be afraid of. You can embrace it, and it can actually be a huge strategic advantage for your business. And, now I feel like Microsoft's culture is one of, hey, let's open source this. And if really, let's find the reason why we can't. Let's not find the reason why we can. And I think that's just a great kind of orientation to take when you're building developer tools and developer services.
So I know the last time that you came on, we had talked about Code Push, and we've been using Code Push at my company, and it's been extremely successful. Everybody that I know that's used it just like loves it. And I think it's by far the best option out there right now for that actual feature, updating your code remotely. And then you guys had developed some VS Code tooling. Can you kind of talk about those two things and what else you guys have going on right now as far as React Native is concerned?
Sure. So the last time I came on the show, it was sometime around February, sometime around ReactConf last year. In fact, we did talk about and announce the VS Code extension for React Native during that time. And the goal of releasing the VS Code extension for React Native was to ensure that people developing mobile applications for iOS and Android have the best debugging and developer experience. So what VS Code typically gave you back then was the ability to edit and change your code right from within VS Code. So that was what was announced. And we've actually been working on the VS Code extension since, and we've had like a bunch of other partner integrations. There are a lot of React Native or even React specific extensions for VS Code that have been developed. And here are some of the things that we are looking at. So one interesting feature that a lot of listeners of React Native Radio might be interested is the integration of Exponent with VS Code. The idea here is one of the biggest pain points when you're trying to get started with React Native is installing the dev toolchain. So you'll have to go figure out where to get Xcode from, where to get Android or Android Studio from, installing the emulators, and all that is really, really painful. On the other hand, if you're on a Windows machine, you really can't do iOS development, right? So this whole environment setup piece is really painful. And what we did was we picked up VS Code and we added the ability to deploy from VS Code directly to Exponent. So you can create a new React Native project. You can go change any JavaScript that you want. And in addition to running that on a device or an emulator, you can now run it in Exponent. The other thing you can also do is start setting breakpoints in VS Code for the app that's running on Exponent. And what this typically has translated to is even if you have a Windows machine and if you have an iPhone, you can go download the Exponent app from the App Store, use your Windows machine, and start writing an iOS application. So that's actually one of the coolest features that we started using, and I think I spoke to a lot of Windows developers, and this kind of a workflow is pretty unique to React Native, if you notice. So this is one feature I'm really excited about. People are really picking it up. Apart from this, we are also running a bunch of other experiments to make dev workflow easy. So we've been working with the folks at NativeBase, and they just released a VS Code extension for native-based snippets. So you will have like all those pretty autocompletes and all those components and even like code snippets from NativeBase in VS Code. So that way, when you write applications using NativeBase, it becomes much more productive. The idea or the general theme, if you notice here, is we are trying to embrace the tools and best practices that the community is using. And I think the goal here is to ensure that we come up with like a suite of extensions for VS Code so that anyone who's developing React Native applications has the best developer experience when they use VS Code as an editor. Apart from that, we're also trying out some really crazy stuff. One of the things that I've been playing around with is time travel debugging. Now, this is something that the React community actually inspired. And if you notice, the way you do Redux debugging is in Redux, you can actually go forward in time, but Redux dev tools also let you go back in time, right? So you can like change the state and go to the previous state and look at how your app looked like. So that's something that's only possible if you're using React and Redux. What we did is the Chakra team inside Microsoft is working on Node, and they kind of introduced time travel debugging into Node.js. So we put that and the whole Redux time travel debugging capability together, and we are now experimenting with time travel debugging for React Native. So the idea here being, inside VS Code, when you set a breakpoint, you'll probably stop at that breakpoint. But now what you can do is instead of just stepping through or stepping forward or stepping into the next line of the code, you can step back into the previous line. And then you can continue all. So what you can do is you can right click on a line and you typically say continue till this code here, right? Now what you can do with time travel debugging is click on a previous statement or like click on a statement 10 functions inside the stack and say continue all the way back to here, trying to understand what happened. So that's one cool feature we are working on. It's not yet ready for production, but I'm hoping that a lot more people get to try it out and give us feedback on what they think about this feature, and it'll be something that will be fun to try out and give feedback on. So that's the VS Code side of the world, I guess.
Wow, that all that stuff sounds super interesting, but I kind of want to know the time travel stuff. I'm going to ask you a few things about that in a second. But as far as the Exponent, the piece that you were talking about, Exponent has been becoming more and more popular. A lot of people that I'm talking to that are getting into React Native are not only starting with Exponent, but they're actually shipping with Exponent. So I think that's going to be a super, super helpful piece. And like you said, I think the most problematic part for new developers getting into React Native is the environment setup. If they've never worked with these SDKs, if they've never worked with the Android SDK and all that stuff, Exponent does a fantastic job of kind of abstracting some of the more painful parts of that. There's still some things you have to kind of install, but it's like nowhere near, of course. So how do people like use the VS Code Exponent feature? Do you have to I guess you have to have Exponent installed, and then you have to have VS Code in the React Native extension, and then what do they need to do at that point?
So they don't really need Exponent installed on the local machine. All they need is they need to install VS Code, and they need to then go get the React Native tools for VS Code extension. That's all you need on your desktop, on your developer machine. On your phones, of course, you would need the Exponent application from either the Android App Store or the iOS App Store. And what you would typically do is you start typing in your code. And again, you don't type in anything Exponent specific. You typically do React Native code. And then what you do is when you hit so you can hit F1, and that will bring up a menu that says Launch in Exponent. And when you click on Launch in Exponent, we automatically sign you in. We automatically convert your React Native project into the Exponent project. And let me talk about why that is done in a minute. But we take care of the automatic conversion, and we push your code. We set up the local tunnel and all of that. and push your code over to the Exponent app running on your device. So the experience is very, very similar to how you'd run on a device. Because it's a part of the VS Code extension, all of these translations are completely transparent. So just like you hit F5 and run it on your device, you just hit F5, select the Exponent option and run it on Exponent. Now talking about the conversion, one of the things about Exponent is if you get started with Exponent today, the flavor of React Native they have is a little bit different from the stock React Native you have. So basically what they do is the NPM repository, in case of Exponent, it's picked up from a different location. There are a few components that are different and all. And because of these changes, you usually start with an Exponent app rather than a React Native app. What we are working on is in a way to convert a React Native app. So we basically switch over the libraries for you. We make the required changes and try to run your React Native app inside Exponent. So as long as you haven't used any native code, or as long as you've only used the native code that Exponent supports, typically, which is most of the things like video and all the typical native code. So if you use only the Exponent supported native code, your app should work just as is.
That's super interesting. I can't wait to actually check that out. So is that something people can start using right now?
Yep, it is already available out in the wild. In fact, our team runs a blog called reactnative.tools, on which I kind of post infrequently, but that has details about how to use it. I'm also working on creating a video to show how VS Code can be used with Exponent. But today, if you download the VS Code React Native extension and look for the command to run with Exponent, or just hit F1 and type Exponent, you should be able to see the option that lets you run with Exponent.
Well, I was just personally Googling and following along with Visual Studio as soon as I heard Exponents. I'm a big fan of Exponent, and so for someone that sometimes I'll put together a side project or have to put together a proof of concept at work, Exponent has been a fantastic tool for me. And I also love Visual Studio Code for node development. I've been using it anytime I'm debugging an API. My instinct is to load up Visual Studio Code, run the node debugger, and prop up errors. So for me, I'm just excited to learn more about these React Native tools.
So Peter, you should go to the Visual Studio Code extension marketplace and look for React Native tools. If you just install that extension, you get all of this functionality for free. In fact, you can set breakpoints even for React Native projects in VS Code, just like node debugging. And just as a side note, you know how you're doing node debugging? The VS Code React Native extension uses the exact same debugging method. In fact, what we do is, if you look at the way React Native debugging works, it launches Chrome, right? So instead of launching Chrome, the other place where JavaScript can run is Node. So VS Code actually launches Node and does Node debugging for React Native. So all of the Node debugging workflow that you've seen with VS Code, for React Native, you get the exact same thing. In fact, we are using the exact same thing under the covers.
This is so cool. Are there any limitations right now? Did you happen to mention anything about live reloading or hot reloading?
You have capabilities for live reloading. You can do hot reloading. In fact, you can even do things like when you click on an error, it'll actually open up that error in VS Code. Like on the red box, when you click on an error, it'll actually open it up on VS Code.
Cool. So if I were just getting started, I would install the React Native Tools extension, and then just how one would typically debug Node apps, you would take that same process for React Native and still get the whole ecosystem that you're used to, right?
Yep, that is correct.
Cool. Are there any concerns or things that you have to do differently for hot reloading, or does that all sort of work the same way?
It all sorts of work the same way. You get all the functionality that you get when you're debugging with Chrome. So under the covers, we are pretty much using the exact same process that Chrome that you use when you're using Chrome.
Awesome.
I've been using VS Code only for a couple of my projects, but I was kind of like an Atom user. Like for example, I'm a Go developer sometimes, and the best editor I found is VS Code. Like even Atom has a better extension, but VS Code works really, really good. That a lot of people actually switch to VS Code. The only thing that I was a little bit concerned, like I was always kind of like nagging. Like usually when Facebook and Microsoft are releasing something, they tend to not work together. And for example, for a couple of months, Facebook was adding some feature to Atom to provide type checking with the.
You mean Flow?
Yes, flow type. And
so Ali, it's actually interesting that you bring it up. I've been talking to the Facebook guys, and there is a Flow extension for VS Code.
Yes, so that was actually going to say it. And the flow type was really good. And I haven't actually gone into the TypeScript, but they tried to push to the TypeScript, and I said, no, we're not supporting TypeScript until somebody actually wrote something really good for the VS Code. And as soon as I found the flow working on VS Code, I simply uninstall Atom and I jump into the VS Code. So right now, my full editor is working with the VS Code, and I'm encouraging everyone to start using the VS Code. VS Code is really, really good, and especially the flow type works amazing in VS Code. And I hope kind of like from Microsoft basically jump in and also integrate the flow type as a kind of like a official extension rather than somebody else actually writing it. That would be amazing, even though Microsoft is pushing the TypeScript, which I understand. But sometimes people like flow type because flow type has a lot of advantage. Like you don't have to actually type everything in order to get it to work. You don't have to actually change your file name into TS. Like there are some barriers. Like for example, if I have a very large code base, it is very hard for me to convert it into the TypeScript. So flow type is going to be my first number one option. So that's why I tend to use the flow type for now until Microsoft does something better, and then I might probably switch. But for now, I was actually going to tell you that VS Code is doing an amazing job. It's 10 times, even 100 times faster than Atom, which is kind of like, even though they're behind the scene, they're using the same technology. But for some reason, VS Code works a lot better. So,
yeah, I think speed is probably one of the things I keep hearing over and over again about VS Code. Typically, things like how you open a project with a lot of files, the way it's indexed, or even how do you open a big file and a really big file and how it works. And Ali, to address your specific question about Flow versus TypeScript, if you'd asked me this question, say 1 year ago, the answer would have been totally different. But I think in terms of feature parity right now, there's not much. Like typically, you also have like nullable, non-nullable types in TypeScript. So most of the features have feature parity. I think at this point of time, the biggest difference between TypeScript and Flow is certain philosophical decisions, right? Like generics and all of those. So that's probably going to take some time to get figured out. And that's just two different ways of doing things. But I think what I should probably, the best way to put it probably is to say that VS Code doesn't really push TypeScript. VS Code works great with TypeScript, but that doesn't mean that other extensions don't work. In fact, there was this funny incident very recently where if you used Flow extension, and so the Flow extension, I'm sure you know, is written by the guys at Facebook. And recently the Flow extension kind of broke the VS Code React Native extension because the Flow extension pretended that it was also a debug type. And I actually went and spoke to the Flow to the Flow guys, and we actually have a solution for that. But the way I see it is Facebook maintains the Flow extension, and it's actually pretty good. If you have to use, if you like Flow and if you want to use Flow, I definitely encourage you to use Flow and the React Native extension. Both of them work great together. I think the general idea is, as Keith was saying earlier, is the goal here is to get to where the developers are. I mean, Microsoft definitely does not want to enforce saying, hey, you're using VS Code, hence go use TypeScript. The idea is VS Code works great with TypeScript, but that doesn't mean that it does not work well with Flow. It also works great with Flow. In fact, one of the things I actually like about the way VS Code is structuring it is, I don't know if you've seen this, but VS Code has this concept of a language service. The idea being you can write your own language service that can provide IntelliSense to whatever you're typing. And this was an idea that was started by VS Code, but other editors are starting to pick it up. And as a result, the hope is no matter what editor you choose, if you implement the language service, you typically have IntelliSense for whatever language you're using. Now, if you come up with a new language of your own, And if you write a language service definition for just your language on one place, it can be used in multiple different editors. And that's the eventual goal, right? So that way, I think that's what I like about this entire concept. And that's the whole idea about, hey, sure, it works great with TypeScript, but Flow is also a pretty good candidate.
Yeah, the only thing that I like about Flow is, I guess the only big difference between the TypeScript and Flow is if I start a project from scratch, I would definitely use TypeScript. But if I have a very large code base in pure JavaScript and I want to add type into it, it would be very difficult for me to start typing everything. As
True.
Flow,
so I think I think the concept of automatic type inference is important. And yes, in TypeScript you can do any : any, but that's not probably the best picture. So I think the TypeScript folks have heard this feedback time and again, and I'm sure they're working on an idea to make that part of the world easy.
Yeah, and I'm not bashing TypeScript. As a matter of fact, I have a bunch of I've heard, and I'm actually doing a lot of libraries, and I'm hearing from a lot of people that if you're trying to maintain a library that provides something like the best example is MobX. MobX is a really the internal code base is actually TypeScript, and I'm actually working with I pushed some code. Like a pull request to the MobX, and it gives me a lot of flexibility. As soon as I started working with it, I can do a refactor, I can add a new feature, and by just running a command, I can tell, oh, it works perfectly. I don't have to worry about, oh, maybe I missed something. So if you build a library with TypeScript, it will be solid. And I encourage that people start using a type system, like either TypeScript and Flow. But if you have a very large code base, you just have to think again, like, do you have time to go through every single file and then change it into the type, or you want to basically do a gradual typing? That's the only difference as far as I know. And as you said, there are two different philosophies. So you just have to choose one, and both of them are perfect. You just have to find your flavor, I believe.
And I think that you actually make an excellent point, and I think this also brings me to one of the other things that we've been doing. So either you can convert your entire library to TypeScript, or you have the concept of type definitions, right? So one of the things that we actually did was there is this repository called Definitely Typed, and one of the things our team did is our team actually went in and updated the definitions for React and React Native. So effectively, the idea here is if you want to use TypeScript with React and React Native, that is something that you can do today. And we have pretty good type definitions. And I just wanted to mention that for all of the TypeScript folks who are trying to play with React and React Native who are listening to the show.
That is amazing.
So I know that Microsoft announced the Mobile Center in late November of last year, of 2016. So can you kind of go into what exactly that is as far as what the Mobile Center does and how people can take advantage of it in building mobile apps?
Yeah, for sure. So when Microsoft bought Xamarin, besides the platform, which everybody already knew about, we had two other services that people paid for. One was called Xamarin Test Cloud, which was for any kind of application, not just applications written with the Xamarin platform, but it could be Swift or Java, React Native, Cordova, what have you. And that allowed you to do UI testing on real-world devices. And then we had Insights, which was crash reporting and analytics only for Xamarin platform apps, but we were about to release a broader version of Insights when we were purchased. And then at Microsoft, there were already some other services like Code Push, which, as you know, is great for Cordova and React Native applications to do live updating. And when there was Hockey App at Microsoft as well, which did crash reporting, some basic analytics, but also beta distribution. And there was another analytics product for mobile developers called Azure Mobile Engagement, which combined both push messaging and analytics together. So once Microsoft acquired us, we did a reorg where we brought all those teams together, and we decided, you know what, let's build kind of a best of breed set of services for mobile developers. And we formed a partnership with the Visual Studio Team Services team as well, because they had a great CI engine. And that's what Mobile Center essentially is. It is the next generation of all of these services in what we consider a very developer-friendly way. meaning we have open REST APIs, we have open source SDKs. You can log in with your GitHub account if you want, for instance. You could use any one of these services without using any of the other ones. And these services kind of fall into three buckets. There are kind of typical kind of DevOps services like CI and CI and Test Cloud and beta distribution. And again, the CI just works out of the box. Just attach your GitHub repo. We can build React Native apps or Swift apps or Xamarin Platform apps, the whole gamut, iOS and Android. Test Cloud works as you can imagine. You can write your UI tests in Appium. You can write them in Espresso. You can write them in C# with UI test, what have you. And then you can distribute to beta testers. And you can do all of these things in an automated fashion where every time there's a commit made to a specific branch, it builds, it tests, it distributes. Then we have a set of services that are kind of like learning services, that is crash reporting, where you can learn about the quality of your app, and analytics, where you can learn about how people are using your apps, where are they from, how many active users do you have. You can look at the custom events that you might have threaded into your application. Hey, are people abandoning my shopping cart, that kind of thing. And then we have back-end services, which include things like Code Push, which is also kind of a beta distribution service. But also includes the Azure backend services for mobile developers, Easy Tables and Easy Auth, where you can very easily add, say, Facebook or Google authentication to your mobile application. And then you can also add tables to your backend, so that if you don't want to write a server right away, you're just kind of prototyping your app to begin with, for instance, you can have that MBAS-like experience. And again, all of these services work by themselves, but you can also compose them together very easily to kind of just handle everything you need as a mobile developer to kind of power and operate your mobile app.
So let me get this straight. If, say, I have a mobile app that I'm working on, but I don't have a backend yet, or I'm just doing some prototyping, I can put together a backend in Xamarin, and then even potentially, can I deploy that to a production environment and use that as so? Or is this strictly from like a testing perspective?
No, this is like, it's not actually, you're not using Xamarin, you're using Mobile Center and you're using Azure.
Okay.
But it's just like Parse, right? So Parse lets you build a backend data API that then you connect to directly from your mobile application. So we offer those same services in Mobile Center that were part of Azure App Services. So you can create a bunch of tables, you can create a bunch of users, you can then integrate the SDK, and you can immediately start syncing data back and forth between that back end that's hosted in Azure and your mobile application.
So in case you're wondering, let me actually maybe put in a scenario. And given that this is a podcast about React Native, also highlight the React Native specific things that we've actually done to Mobile Center. And I think so the simplest thing is, as Keith was saying, you can sign in with GitHub. And once you sign in, you can start saying, hey, every time I make a check-in to this GitHub repository, start building my applications. And what we do today is we build your React Native application. And in addition to building your application, we also run any Jest unit tests that we have. So I guess the community has pretty much narrowed in on Jest being the default test runner for React Native, right? So you can run your Jest test. So all your snapshot testing, all of that works perfectly fine. And what you can do is, in the build process, you can also say, if my build succeeds, here are the two certificates, or here's the certificate and here's the provisioning profile. Sign it with the certificate and go distribute it via Hockey app or via Code Push or via whatever other mechanism. So you can specify all of that in your build definition. And it's basically just a drag and drop. It's like three input boxes and a couple of places to upload the certificates. And that way, all you have to do is just set that up once. And after that, every single time you make a check-in, the build runs automatically, creates a build tab, automatically signs it for you, so you don't have to worry about anything like that, runs any tests that people have written, and then distributes it via Hockey app today. Eventually, in the future, we'll also be able to figure out if it can be distributed via Code Push, or if the build itself is code pushable, or do you need a Hockey app distribution. So we'll do that. And I think there's also a VSTS integration with Fastlane that lets you push directly to the store. So I'm not sure if that's something that's probably going to come in the future, but there are possibilities of, hey, you can push even to the store if you want. So that's the whole push story. The next step is basically identities and tables. So as far as identity is concerned, authentication is concerned, we are looking at writing a React Native specific authentication provider. So this will be something that you can directly integrate with your with your navigator so that you can check for authentication and all of that. On the tables part of the world, you will have offline support automatically. So Keith was talking about data synchronization, right? So all the offline support will already be provided for a React Native application. On the crashes side, not only will you get native crashes, you'll also get JavaScript stack traces of crashes that your users hit. So basically what we do is when we are building the app for you, we generate a source map and upload the source map. So next time a crash report comes in, if it's native, if it's just a pure native crash, we show you what it is. But if you say have a code that says throw new error in JavaScript, we actually use the source map to determine which file and which line the error was in. So that way you'll have full source map, full JavaScript crash reporting support. On the user engagement and user analytics side, as Keith was saying, you can get custom events. But apart from that, we are also working on integrating it with React Native navigation so that you have like all navigation events and all page flows and all of that rich kind of metrics that you typically need for any React Native application. And of course, all of this, on top of all of this, you have code push support. And in code push, we are thinking of doing things like A/B testing and ensuring that code push works with like Hockey app very, very well. And you don't even have to release a code push bundle. The build process will do it for you. So it's an integrated suite of tools. But again, you can pick and choose one. Like, for example, you could use Jenkins and just use the distribution, for example. So that workflow is also possible.
That sounds super nice. It kind of sounds like you guys are trying to kind of make a one-stop place for you to kind of build and manage your mobile applications, and specifically, are you kind of targeting the JavaScript centric and the Xamarin style mobile apps, or can people also use native iOS and native Android apps?
Any kind of app they want, right? So one of the things that we don't expect the entire world to ever just use one platform. Right? Some people love C# and they're going to use C#, and some people love JavaScript, they're going to use JavaScript, and other people are going to want to use the native tooling of Swift and Java and whatnot. And we just want to be where the developer is. And Mobile Center really, embodies that philosophy. We don't require any specific platform. We don't require any specific language, but we want to give you a set of services as a mobile developer that really enable you to do things that you just can't do on your own, or you can't do without like a tremendous amount of work, right? Especially in the DevOps space. Setting up CI for a mobile application, setting up CI for like a normal Swift application is very difficult. Just imagine how much more difficult it is, as you guys know, with when you're using something like React Native or the Xamarin platform, where it's a combination of things like Xcode technologies plus, say, Mono or plus various JavaScript technologies. So we've tried to take all of that hard work and do it for you, so that you are literally just clicking a button and saying, "Build this branch," and then send it to my beta testers. And then we'll take care of everything else for you. And use that same philosophy for building your backend, and use that same philosophy for how we show you crash reports, right? Like most crash reporting technology can't show you your Java or Objective-C or Swift crashes threads along with your JavaScript threads. And that's something we wanted to make really brain dead simple to do. But again, for any kind of developer, right? Any kind of developer, any kind of app. And we just want to be we ship all the time. We ship multiple times a week. And we just want to hear from customers, what do they need to be faster, more efficient developers, and then build those services and build those tools for them.
This will turn any Apple fanboy into a Microsoft one, that's for sure.
That's the hope, right? Like we just love developers, and we want them to feel our love.
No, you guys have been doing just a ridiculously good job over the last couple of years. It's amazing. I mean, you've gone from, or Microsoft has kind of gone from being, of course, everyone used to say, like, the opposite of like open source friendly. And then, for a while they were getting into it, but now you guys seem to be on the forefront of open source in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And it's a thing. If you do that, you really create some you create great fans, you create a lot of great love, but really, in the end, what you're doing is you're kind of pushing the whole world forward, right? Like we're if every time me and Ram build a tool or a service that makes developers more efficient, that means there are thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of developers who are going to ship their software more quickly or better software. And then there's going to be millions, if not billions of people who use that software, and they're able to get it in their hands sooner than they would have otherwise, right? And you're actually just improving the world in a really incredible way.
So I've been using CodePush in quite a few apps over the last year, but I'm just in case someone's listening that doesn't know what CodePush is, can you guys kind of give a quick overview of what CodePush is and kind of what also is going to be? I know you spoke about a few things that you're going to be possibly adding, like A/B testing, but kind of go over like what CodePush is and what the future of CodePush is.
Sure. So CodePush is the best way to put it is CodePush is the way to update your React Native apps instantly without having to go through the App Store process. So the best way to think of it is CodePush makes your apps look pretty much like websites. You can make updates as and when you want. The question that I get almost all the time is, hey, is it okay in Apple Store? Is it legal in Apple Store and all of that? So one of the things I want to point out, and I think it's clause number 3.3.8. God, I've said this so many times that I probably even remember the number, but the section 3.3.8 actually says that you should not update your applications dynamically unless the code is run in a web view or JavaScript core. So in case of React Native, all of your code is running in JavaScript core, right? So in Apple's terms and conditions, it actually says that it's okay to dynamically update any code that runs in JavaScript core. Now, what that also means is if you have updates to your application that involve native Objective-C code or native Swift code, you cannot use CodePush. So CodePush is a way basically to update any part of your application that's pure JavaScript. And what a lot of people do, what I've seen a lot of people do is people have shipped one version of their app with CodePush enabled. And then after that, they've been doing multiples and multiples of over-the-air updates without having to go through the App Store approval process and without having to wait for people. And this is actually fantastic for a lot of people because in case you have to change like a spelling mistake or in case you have to change some JavaScript code, JavaScript logic, people are able to do that using CodePush directly. The way CodePush works is so if you look at the internals of CodePush, the React Native CodePush SDK is actually open source. So I invite you to go poke around and look and see what it does. But to give you an overview, what it does basically is whenever a React Native application starts up, it loads your index.bundle.js, the main compiled bundle of your JavaScript from a location. Now, what CodePush does is rather than loading it from that specific location on the disk, it actually loads it from a different location. And if updates are available, CodePush can go to the server, download the updates, and make that the default bundle. So as you keep making changes, the diffs are downloaded, and the code that's loaded by React Native is this new bundle that's updated from the server. That's basically the philosophy of CodePush. Coming to the second part of your question about what's next for CodePush, what's new for CodePush. So I think one of the things that we've been hearing is a lot of people have started using CodePush in production servers or production machines. In fact, recently there was a big customer who wanted to use CodePush for like a TV program or something where there were like tons and tons of people who suddenly got an app update. So one of the things that we are ensuring is that we are helping people scale CodePush so that CodePush service doesn't go down. So scaling the entire service and converting it from a toy project to, hey, this is something you can go use in production. So that's one of the biggest focuses right now. Apart from that, we've also noticed that people are using CodePush for doing A/B testing. Now, the idea here is it's kind of a hack. And what people do is they create like multiple deployments. That's the terminology in CodePush, but it's basically multiple groups. And then they send update A to a set of users and update B to another set of users based on like geography or phone types or whatever. And then they try to find out what gets converted better. I mean, this is something that you do on websites very, very often, right? On the mobile apps, it's a little harder. But Code Push makes it super simple because now you can run all sorts of these A/B experiments like right off the bat, and you just need to think about it, write it up, and then you can send out a Code Push update without having to go through the App Store process. So people are already using Code Push for A/B testing. What we want to do is we want to ensure that the way they use Code Push for A/B testing is even natural and naturally built into Code Push. So rather than you having to hack it through groups and stuff, we want to ensure that you have a feature in Code Push that lets you do A/B testing. But in the more short term, some of the things that we want to do is we want to integrate Code Push into Mobile Center. What that will mean is we finding the ability to say, hey, you can either send this update via Hockey app, or guess what? You don't need the entire app updated. You just need this update is code pushable. So here guys, just take the Code Push update and you're good. So adding it to the DevOps pipeline, that's like our first priority. So we will be working on integrating it with our existing mobile center, and that way people who are already using Code Push can start taking advantage of the other services, and they'll have a better experience. So that's like a more short-term goal.
Well, I think the A/B testing is going to be huge. That just sounds just awesome. It's almost unheard of to have it that easy for mobile development. I think that's something that we would use, and I think a lot of people would love that.
Yeah, our hope is that all the things that are easy to do in the web world today, we can really bring to all mobile developers. Of course, it'll be generally easiest to bring those to React Native developers, which is one of the advantages of the React Native platform.
Do you guys have a plan to open source the server side of Code Push?
I would say it's unlikely that we'll be open sourcing a lot of our server side components, just because oftentimes they're very bespoke to our internal environment. I think there's opportunities that we'll look at in the future for some pieces and components of it. It's kind of like what you see with Google or Amazon, for instance, where Google will not necessarily open source the actual back end service that they use, but they may take those concepts and create an open source version, or other people will. So we'll definitely be looking at things like that in the future. We are planning to make sure that everything we offer, has a open REST API, including webhooks and all those kinds of things, so that people can easily integrate and things like that.
And I think to add to Keith's point, one of the other interesting things, so as Keith was saying, the Code Push server is actually very Azure specific and very specific to our infrastructure. But if you're interested in learning what Code Push is doing and how does it work, there is this project by Walmart Labs where they have an open source server, and then you can use the existing Code Push SDK with their server. So the server itself is not super complex in itself. And if you're interested in learning how it works, I'd recommend taking a look at that project by Walmart Labs, which uses the Code Push client-side SDK with their version of the Code Push server.
Well, I will definitely look into it. And two things I want to add is one of the reasons I'm actually asking this is the Walmart app is pretty good, and the second one is sometimes like I'm actually working as our application needs to be deployed in enterprise location, and usually enterprise people are very restricted, as you all know, and they want to host everything. They don't trust nobody. They want to host everything. So as a developer, if I want to introduce, by the way, we can use the Code Push, I said, okay, where's the server-side component? We're going to hold it. Said, I can't. It's actually on the Microsoft side. And said, okay, so we can use it.
Right. So in that case, the Walmart solution would be best for you. But in general, with all Azure services, and Mobile Center runs in Azure like Microsoft's other cloud services, there's something called Azure Stack, which is a version of Azure basically that you can run in your own data center. And that exact scenario is one that we do look at as a possible motivator for including Mobile Center technology in Azure Stack. But there's no concrete plans to do that quite yet.
So is there anything else that you want to kind of talk about that you all have going on right now?
I think we've covered a lot of it, especially for React Native developers. Is there anything you can think of, Ram?
Nothing specific, but I think I'd like to take this opportunity to invite folks to try out Mobile Center. I don't know if we even said where to try it out, so this is probably a good time as any. So if you want to try out Mobile Center, visit http://mobile.azure.com. Head to that URL, and I think you should be able to try out all the things that we spoke about today.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure we put a link to that URL in our notes. So I guess we'll go ahead and jump to the picks. Peter, do you have any picks?
Yeah. So I was just working on card input, and this one was super cool. The demo I put together, everybody loved. What it does is it basically generates a full blown credit card for you, and as you type, it'll actually flip the credit card over to the CVC and stuff. It's super interactive. It's super easy to use, and takes care of a lot of the things that you don't like to take care of. So definitely check it out.
Keith, do you have any picks?
So I'm reading a book right now by Michael Lewis. It's his latest one. It's called The Undoing Project, and it's about the friendship and the collaboration between Daniel Kahneman and Avis Tversky, who really created behavioral economics. And it's just a fascinating book, both about those people, but also about this underlying science of how often we and the way we think can lead to all kinds of errors. And, what we can do to really understand our minds better and to make better decisions. The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis.
Okay, Ram, do you have any picks?
Sure, I do. My pick is an open source project that I have been working on. It's called Mayakai, M as in Macy's, MAYA-KAI. The idea of this project is it lets you gesture sync across multiple devices. So for React Native, when you're testing across multiple devices like an iPhone, an iPhone S, and an iPad, today a lot of people actually go to each device and run their application, right? So this project basically mirrors your gestures, mirrors your touches and finger movements and all of that across all the three devices. So you just interact with one device and all the other devices start following what you're doing. And it's actually purely JavaScript based, no native code required. So it works not just on regular React Native apps, but even an Exponent. So the idea is hopefully by using this, you can test your React Native applications on multiple form factors without having to actually go interact with each of those devices.
Okay, great. I have one pick, and my pick is a Google developers playlist. It's called Machine Learning Recipes with Josh Gordon, and it's 7 or 8 videos, and it's a really good introduction to machine learning, and it was kind of the first time I kind of had an aha moment and kind of understood what the heck was going on with machine learning. So I think if anyone's interested in that, check it out. Okay, well, Keith, Ram, thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Guys, this was literally one of the most info-packed sessions we've had. I think I spent more time taking notes and doing research just because there was so much awesome stuff. I was like, what? This is insane. So I really appreciate you guys coming on, and I'm sure everybody else does too.
Well, thank you very much for having us. It's it's been a great year for, I feel like, mobile developers and especially React Native developers. So here's hoping 2017's just as exciting.
Definitely. Okay, well, that wraps up episode 50 of React Native Radio. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.